Welcome, and as always, we will start pretty much as with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And as I mentioned, I have to hunt for it now. Good heavens. So interesting. I'll have to see if I can come. All right. Give me a moment. I have to, there it is. This is interesting. There it is. So we are going to do a little more Torah Temimah. You can see that he has a few comments on Tzedek Terdof right there. It's got 5 comments on it. So we'll take a look at the next one. And this one is from Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is a tractate that deals with legal procedures and legal requirements. It talks about different kinds of courts. There were different courts for capital cases. Within Jewish law, there's a distinction made between capital cases and I would say, how can I put it, domestic cases, issues involving, whether it involves issues between 2 litigants, or whether it involves or damages, things like that, as opposed to capital cases. And capital cases require a court of 23 judges. 23 judges. So, at any rate, here we go. Tzedek Terdof. Reish Lakish Rami. So Reish Lakish is one of the great Amoraim. He was Rabbi Yochanan's interlocutor. And there's some really great stories about how Reish Lakish started off life as a bandit, and how Rabbi Yochanan recognized something great in Reish Lakish, and he was able to make Reish Lakish into a great, great scholar. And then they would disagree. Their disagreements are all over the Gemara between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish has one opinion, Rabbi Yochanan has a different opinion, and they're all over it. So some of the perhaps more Zen-like elements within the Gemara, at any rate. So Reish Lakish Rami. So Rami is to throw, but literally what it means is to point out an apparent contradiction, right? It's a technical word used in the Gemara to suggest that we're going to see something that's contradictory. Ketiv. So one verse says in Parshat Kedoshim, Betzedek tishbot. It says, in righteousness you shall judge. Right. So notice how many times it mentions tzedek there. Uchtiv tzedek terdof. And here it says tzedek terdof. So ha keitzad. How do we resolve this? What are we talking about? So how come in one place it only says tzedek once, and in another place it says tzedek twice? That's the contradiction. Kan bedin merumeh. In the second case, it is talking about a case that comes up and the judges sense there's something fraudulent about the case. Kan bedin she'eino merumeh. And the case where it just says tzedek once is talking about a trial or a court case which does not appear to have any fraudulent elements within it. Look at the awareness, right? The application of law to pragmatics, the practical application of law. So he's showing that how the Torah is sensitive to that particular issue. So let's take a look here. This is Pei Gimel right here. Medayek. So a diuk means a way to look at the language or a point and to make a big deal out of it. In other words, most of us, I think, could see tzedek in one place and tzedek in another place and say, okay, linguistic style, something like that, and not be bothered by it. But we've had this example of where it's especially used in Midrash, where a word is emphasized. So essentially it says the emphasis, right? The halashon tzedek terdof, because the expression tzedek terdof, you shall pursue, right? You shall pursue after righteousness. Only righteousness shall you pursue, or righteousness shall you pursue. Moreh, it teaches, shetachazor v'tedakdek harbe, that you need to go back over the material, over the testimony, and look into it very carefully, right? So grammar, for example, the Hebrew word for grammar is dikduk, which means when you look into the language in a very analytical and parse it out, and because it's obviously on a different kind of level. So here we're looking at the evidence, right? You look at the claims and the evidence and everything, and you do it harbe, a great deal. You go to great pains to sift through the evidence and the claims and the whole circumstances, etc. Limtzor ha'emet habrura, to discover, to find the clear truth, clarified truth. V'hainu, and specifically, shetarbe didrishot v'chakirot, that you should go over, you should ask a lot of questions, and rishot are questions regarding accompanying circumstances. In other words, I think an example was that the person was killed under this fig tree, and the question is, what kind of fig tree was it? In other words, to determine the validity of the testimony. Was it in flower? Were there a lot of, what color were the figs on it, etc.? That would be an example, right? What clothing were they wearing, etc., right? And chakirot are examination regarding date, time, and place, right? What time of the month did this happen? Was it early in the day? Was it in the middle of the day, etc.? And where exactly did it happen? And to go into very particular details, ask lots and lots of questions, cross-examination, right? Masha nochen, that's what this abbreviation stands for, which is not the case, but tzedek tishpot, where it simply says, in righteousness shall you judge. Mashma, which suggests, which implies, the ikar hakapeda, that the important element, right, of the concern, okay, of the legal concern here, rak shelo lishpot sheker, that you should just be careful not to have false judgment. Aval lo ledakdek harbe, but it's not a command to go a great deal, right, to get into particulars regarding drishot v'chakirot, right, regarding the examination, the cross-examination. Excuse me. Umokim dibadin meruma, and it says, and what he does is he takes the tzedek, right, to refer to, he makes it refer to that verse regarding a judgment, a case that comes up that appears to have false information, right, where there's cheating going on. A ramai is the word that we use for a cheat in Hebrew. Hainu, that is to say, shahabetin, that the court, makirin, they recognize, they see, bahatovea, with regard to the one bringing the case, shahu ramai, that he's a cheat, or mevinin, or they understand, ta'ana ramait bidvarav, they can understand that there is some false claim in his words, right? Don't we have spurious cases where people are just trying to use legal means to accomplish ends that are false, right? It's something that goes on all the time, right? Or b'divrei ha'adim, or they sense that there's something false in the words of the witnesses. Az yishtadlu, then they have to try. Betin, the court has to make an effort, lidrosh v'lechakor, to cross-examine heavily. Uvidin she'eino meromeh, but in a case of which is not, they don't suspect that there's anything false going on here. Eino tzarich laharbot b'drishot v'chakirot. There is not a requirement to go greatly to greatly cross-examine. That's the comment here. So any thoughts, any reaction to that? Give you a second. So stop the share a second. See, you need a chance to react to this. Okay, just looking for appreciation there of Reish Lakish's comment. All right. Onwards, next one. This is another interesting sort of take, right? As we sort of get down and dirty into what we're talking about here. So, Tzedek Jidov. And again, this is from Sanhedrin. No surprises here, page 32-2. Echad ladin ve'echad lepshara. So there's a case where something is tried with the intent of finding that one side, fighting in favor of one side over the other side, right? You have two different claimants, and they each have their own claim, and you're looking to settle on one side, right? Ve'echad lepshara. The same applies to compromise. Pshara, of course, compromise. So, in other words, one tzedek refers to in a trial, and another tzedek has to do with compromise. That's how they're understanding this verse. Ketzad, what are we talking about? How? Shtei sfinot. So there are two boats, shepak'u zeh bazeh, that they come against each other. In other words, they're approaching each other. Im ovrot shtehem tovot. If both of them continue to move towards each other, they're both going to sink. Bazu acharzu, but if one holds up and the other one goes, and then the other one proceeds, shtehem ovrot, then both of them are going to be able to pass safely. Ha-ketzad. So how do we deal with this, right? How do we deal with this? So what it's going to go into right now is on what basis do we devise this compromise? Te'una v'she'enei te'una. Suppose one is loaded and one isn't loaded. Tidche she'ena te'una mipnei te'una. So the one that isn't loaded should hold back, right? Should give way to the one that is loaded. That's the basis of a righteous compromise. Ukrova, what about one that is close to port, right? Close to its destination. Ve'sheina krova, and the other boat isn't close to its destination. Tidche krova, so the one that is nearer its destination, mipnei sheina krova, should give way to the one that is further away from its destination. Well, you know where we're heading here. Hayu shtehen krovot, shtehen rechokot. But what if both of them are close to their destination or far away from their destination? Hatel pshara beinehem. In this case, you have to. One has to compromise, right? One has to see about devising a compromise. Uma'alot schar zo l'zo. And the one who gives way, so I think what either it means, and there is a benefit, right? There's a benefit one to the other. So it's possible that you have to, what this could mean is that the one who has to give up something might have to then pay the other one for it, something like that. But what they appear to be doing here is looking at the difference between a din and a compromise and pshara. But let's take a look. We'll see what the Torah Temimah has to say about this. Okay. Sarich lomar. So we have to say, the afal pi shebezo achazo, that in the case of one following the other, shtehin ovrot, okay, they both are going to be able to pass safely. Afilu hachi, nevertheless, right, even here, Yesh yitron laha'overet mikodem. So he's saying that it's all talking about compromise. He's saying this whole passage is talking about compromise. And yet we see that in the case that we just mentioned, that is not the immediately lost case, but the case before, right? If we're talking about one that is going to be able to have the advantage of passing first, right? There is an advantage to ha'overet mikodem that passes by to begin with. Kagon, for example, shetavo kodem lemachoz chefza. So, for example, it'll arrive first at its destination. Remember, we're talking about two boats that are equally distant from their destination. So the one that passes first is going to get there first. Or sheyesh lachush lesibat drachim. Now, what exactly this refers to, I am not exactly certain, but yesh lachush, one might be concerned, one might sense, sibat drachim, maybe it has to do with the way. Derech is the way, right? A way or a path. Siba is a reason, okay? So I'm not sure. I probably have to go back and see if I can find this expression and see what exactly it means. So it could have to do with, a more direct, that it has the more direct way to go rather than a more circuitous way. I am telling you that I am guessing. The imlo hachi, because if we don't say this, and we don't explain it this way, b'mai mechulakim, right? In what sense is there any difference? Umay nafka mina loho, right? And what practical difference, what difference really is there for them? Ezit avor mikodem, as to which one is going to pass first, right? If it really makes no difference, it makes a difference. Velo sfira le, the drasha zo. Now this got complicated for me because I wasn't sure exactly the point that he is trying to make here. So I hope you don't mind my drawing you into areas where I myself am curious, but it's not going to be the first time, right? And the author of this particular interpretation doesn't hold sfira law. He doesn't reason lidrasha zod, the person who holds this particular explanation, that one tzedek refers to din and the other tzedek refers to pshara, karesh lakish. He doesn't agree, right? He doesn't hold like Reish Lakish, bidrasha hakodemet, in the previous interpretation. Pasuk ata, that the verse is coming, le'inyan din murameh, that it's talking about a false claim, right? A case that involves falsehood. Vihine, and in fact, inyan pshara zo shebekan, and in fact, this matter of the compromise here, shebekan, that's in this place, this compromise here, eno me inyan pshara stam. It's not talking about general compromise. She'efshar la'asot gam din gam shara, where we might be talking about a case where it's possible either to choose to go by way of a court, right, a trial, gam shara, or we can go ahead and simply compromise. Ma she'eno ken zo, okay, which is not the case of the I believe Reish Lakish's case, Shetzier, that he described. Lo shayach din rak pshara. Ooh, okay. So let's see what he's saying. Okay, I think I understand what he's saying now. Forgive me, because the Hebrew is not easy. Okay, so the first case here is he's talking about Reish Lakish's case, where it's not that where you're talking in general, where you could either choose to make it just doesn't apply, right? When you're talking about false cases, that's not going to be able to do it. Okay, let's say. Okay, right. I think he's talking about Reish Lakish. I told you this got a little confusing for me. But here it's saying here, Zo, I'm going to think Zo refers to this one that he's described, where in the case of the boats, right? I think he's talking about these boats. One has to make a compromise, because if you don't compromise, one of them's going to, they're either both going to sink, or certainly one's going to sink. But they said both would sink, right? Okay. V'yesh lahayir. So let's see if we can get any further clarification. And one can clarify shelitziyur pshara kazor, that when we're talking about this example of compromise, she'ivshar rak b'pshara, that when it's a case where you are forced into a compromise, lo hevi me'otan hamavu'arot. Okay, so he's getting quite technical here. He did not, so there are examples, he did not bring examples from those that are clarified, the kama makomot b'Gemara, in many places, or a number of places in the Gemara, and he gives you examples, kamo b'Ketubot, for example, in the tractate Ketubot 95a, v'chozrin chalila ad sheyasu pshara beinehem, where whatever they're talking about them, okay, it's saying that they have to go back and they have to keep discussing. It's like a case where, for example, the school district and the teachers have to figure out something. And it says they have to go back. It sounds like it's that kind of example until you make a compromise between the two. So it's one of those cases, all right? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think also, to me, it also sounds like they're going through the distinction between a compromise and yielding. Okay,
Yeah.
and what I mean by that is that, if you've got two boats, that are about to crash, right? If nobody, if they don't come to some compromise, agreement, in some sort of peaceful way or whatever, amiable way, right? Mm-hmm. Then you wind up with somebody has to yield. Well, to me, that's not really a compromise, right? It's like the two cars driving towards a cliff, right? And one stops, the other one goes off, right? I mean, that the game of chicken. I mean, it's the same thing, right? So, you have a compromise where it's done in an amiable fashion or willing cooperative fashion, and then you have a case where it's still a compromise, but it's a yield because the circumstances are somebody has to give up, or they're going to wind up sacrificing their life in the extreme, right? And I think that's what this sounds like, is the different, discussing those differences. Maybe I'm wrong.
No. I hear you. I mean, regardless in a compromise, somebody has to yield. Has to be willing to yield. Whereas in a case of a court, the court adjudicates it. It's done. Both sides have to agree to however the court adjudicates. Where in this particular case, there's some give and take. But yeah, no. I appreciate very much you're trying to clarify what it is. So he gives another example in Shavuot 45a. Hayush nehem chashudim yachloku. So in a case where both of them have there's reason to suspect both of them. So they found this object, right? This is what this sounds like, that they both found this object and each lays claim to it, and both of them, it appears, have some false level to their claim. In that case, since it's a found object, they should divide up the object. Okay, again, a type of compromise. V'chein b'kama makumot, and likewise in several places, the paskinan, where we come out with the decision, where we decide yachalku, that they need to divide whatever it is that they're arguing over, the shuda de daina, and that has to do with that it's up to judicial discretion. Okay, that's how they have to divide up whatever it is by judicial discretion, mitam, for the reason she'ifshar levarer, because it's impossible to clarify velavo ad omek hadin, to in fact describe the case indeed. So in a way, I think this is how he's trying to explain this, if I may, attempt to explain this, that he's saying why this is very different from Reish Lakish's point, who says where you see any false claim, then you simply have to keep going until you can find a clarity. And here it's talking about, it seems to be he's saying that there may be a case where, both sides have a problem, where it's impossible to get clarity no matter how much you ask, etc., etc. Okay. So anyway, so this I think is a little clearer, and hopefully I have time to go through this with you. Vehine mevu'ar b'Gemara, and here it is, the Gemara clarifies. Keshem shemuzhar. So this is the interesting thing. Keshem shemuzhar mehatot et hadin, that just as the Torah forbids you from being biased in a court case, right? In a legal case that's going to trial. Kach muzhar mehatot et hapshara. In the same way, you cannot show favoritism when you seek compromise. Ukeshem sheta'a badin, and in a situation where the judge has made a mistake in his decision, right? He's given a claim that was not the right claim or the right decision. Choser, right? You have to go back and retrial. Kach im ta'a bipshara choser. Likewise, if there was a mistake made in the process of developing the compromise, you have to go back and redo it. So that's the tzedek, right, of this particular comment. Uvis Sanhedrin Vav Aleph, and in the tractate Sanhedrin, page 6a, Piresh Rashi comments, Makshinan Pshara Ledin. We connect compromise to a trial. Dichtiv, as it states, Vayhi David Oseh Mishpat Utzdaka. Because the reason why we do that is because it says in this verse in Samuel 1, I'm going to guess, that's where you read about King David. David performed righteousness and judgment, and justice, justice and righteousness, right? So Samuel 2, chapter 8. V'amrinan sham, and there we say, Dezeh Pshara, that the mishpat would be trial, right? Going through a court, the proper judgment. And staka is considered pshara. That's the compromise. And the reason we say that staka refers to compromise is because it's connected right there to mishpat, which would be a judicial procedure. Ad kan lashono, that's the end of his quote. But Tameh Ani, this is a sweet little personal comment that Baruch Halevi Epstein makes. He says, and I'm surprised, Shelo Hevi, that he didn't cite me Parsha or me Shelefanenu, that he didn't simply quote this Parsha that we're talking about, or this Katuv, Tzedek Tirdof, right? And this, or mi Pasuk, Shelefanenu, from the verse that is right here in front of us, Tzedek Tirdof. And here we have this, right? We have this statement in Sanhedrin that explains it, Echad ladin ve'echad l'pshara, that one tzedek refers to a trial, a court, a judicial procedure, court case, and another talks about compromise. Pasuk ze b'dayanim kativ, and this particular verse is talking about judges, right? V'tzarich iyun. So I think he's saying the verse in Samuel is talking more about the fact that he set up judges to adjudicate all these cases, and that's what was so great about King David, is he made sure that there were courts available for people to bring their cases and disputes. But this verse here, right, Tzedek Tedorf, is being explained specifically as Mishpat and Sarah. But Tzarich, he says, well, one needs further investigation on this. It requires further comment. Now, just a little bit more. The Iyen B'Sefer Revid HaZahav, and he says, and look in the book. It's called Revid HaZahav by, I think it's a Rabbi Diskin, Khan, here in this place, Shekatav, who wrote this, Vezer Lishono, and this is a quote. The Kaimalan, we have on authority, the Tzarich Hadayan, that the judge has to, Lishol Leval Din, he needs to ask the claimants, the people who are coming for, who are the disputants, right? Ipshara be'itu, if they would prefer to go for a compromise, or dina be'itu, or do they prefer a legal, right, a legal process that uses, the court process, or mitzvah. And he goes on to say, and it is a mitzvah, right? It's in this case, I think he means a good deed. It's preferable. Lahakdim behashala Bahashela Shara Ladin, and it's important to offer compromise before a court case. Ad kan Lashono, end of his quote. The Katav Od, and moreover, he says, he reads, he says, there's a reason for this. Utamihani, he says, there's good reason for doing this. Utamihani, and Baruch Halevi Epstein says, I'm amazed, right? Al HaMechaber, regarding the author of Revit HaZahav, HaNechbad, who is so honored, Shahaya Din Mumche, he was considered an expert judge, Larabim, for the multitudes. Uvazeh Hitahu Zichrono. And in this particular matter, he made a mistake of blessed memory. Because it says, Meforash b'Gemara, it says explicitly in the Gemara, in Sanhedrin 7a, that Tzarich Lomar Mikodem, they have to say, to begin with, I Dina Be'itu, you have to say, do you want to take this case to trial? V'acharkach, and only following that, Ipshara Be'itu, or would you prefer to go for a compromise? V'chein hu barambam, it's the same thing. Rambam supports this particular statement. Uvechoshen mishpat, and the Shulchan Aruch, or the Tur, Siman Yud Bet Samach Bet. We got to the end of that. So again, I'm going to stop the share here, and just some interesting, how this material is just so capable. That there's such minds that attach themselves to this material and come up with all kinds of issues or practical issues, and trying to deal with the pragmatics of how you bring Torah down from Mount Sinai into the world. So I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you.